Good morning and welcome to this webinar. My name is Anu Yadav and I am an intern at Physiotherapy Department of Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay, National Institute for Persons with Physical Disabilities. Today's webinar is on the topic of urinary incontinence. We are going to discuss on the following major areas such as what is urinary incontinence, its causes, types, assessment and treatment. Urinary incontinence is the problem with the process of urination, also known as micturition. It happens involuntarily, means that the person might urinate without intending to. It is especially problematic because it affects the person's personal hygiene and social life. Hence, it can be defined as an involuntary loss of urine, which is socially and hygienically inappropriate in a person above the age of 5 whose mental and psychological state is sound. It is estimated that around 423 million people 20 years and older worldwide experience some form of urinary incontinence. Incontinence can affect both men and women in any age group but is more common in women and the elderly, rising steadily between the ages of 60 to 80 years. Normal urinary continence and bladder control requires a complex interaction between the brain, nervous system and organs in the pelvis, which includes the bladder, urethra, the prostate in men, and the muscles of pelvic floor called the levator ani. The levator ani is made up of three parts: pubococcygeus, puborectalis and ileococcygeus. The pelvic floor acts as a dynamic platform that spans the outlet of pelvis to support the abdominal and pelvic organs. It is composed of muscle, fascia and ligaments. The chief function of pelvic floor is support, but in addition the pelvic floor muscles contribute to the maintenance of continence of urine and feces while also allowing voiding, defecation, sexual activity, childbirth and stability. The bladder is a hollow sac lined by a smooth muscle called the detrusor muscle whose fibers are arranged in a complex meshwork. It has an ideal arrangement to reduce the lumen of bladder in all directions when they contract in unison. The bladder acts alternately as a storage organ and then as a pump to void urine in a cyclic fashion. We will now discuss the physiology of micturition. The micturition, that is urination cycle, consists of three phases: bladder filling, bladder emptying and termination. During the filling phase, the detrusor muscle is compliant and the detrusor pressure is usually less than 15 cm of water. At a volume of 150 to 200 ml, the first mild desire to void is commonly felt. Normally, this desire can be postponed at least to allow for completion of necessary preparations for voiding. Eventually, with increasing stored volume, the pressure within the bladder begins to rise and the sensation of fullness becomes more consciously apparent and persistent. A decision to void is taken, a socially acceptable site is found, and necessary preparations are made. On completion of the void, the levator ani and sphincter muscle contract and the detrusor muscle stops contracting and is ready to store again. The normal bladder's compliance, that is, the elastic ability of the bladder to accommodate an increasing volume of fluid without a rise in pressure, accommodates and stores the incoming urine without a significant rise in pressure within the bladder. Reflux of urine up the ureters is prevented by peristaltic waves of muscular contraction that pass down the walls of ureters and the oblique entry of ureters into the bladder. Continence is maintained so long as the pressure within the bladder is lower than the closer pressure of urethra. In the absence of stressful environmental or other factors such as urethral obstruction, the detrusor contraction combined with normal slight shortening and opening of the relaxing urethra empties the bladder in a continuous steady stream in a short time. Continence is controlled neurologically at three levels: spinal, pontine and cerebral. As the bladder begins to fill, parasympathetic afferent fibers convey this information via the pelvic nerves to sacral roots S2 to S4 to the sacral micturition center. The impulses ascend in the lateral spinothalamic tracts and are then relayed to pons where there are areas capable of inhibiting or exciting the sacral micturition center. As the volume of stored urine increases, the cortex becomes involved in detrusor inhibition, and if micturition is not to take place, it is usually possible to suppress the voiding urge to a subconscious level again and postpone bladder emptying. In addition, sympathetic afferent input via the hypogastric nerves, thoracic 11 to lumbar 3 from the bladder wall and smooth muscles of urethra can stimulate sympathetic efferent impulses to reduce the bladder's tendency to contract and to increase urethral pressure. When the decision to micturate is taken, descending efferent impulses are released. In addition to initiating all the preparatory activity, these impulses cause inhibition of pudendal and pelvic nerve firing and inhibition of sympathetic impulses. The cortex and the pontine center suppress the inhibitory output to the sacral center and enhance excitatory output to allow firing of the pelvic efferent parasympathetic nerves to cause the detrusor to contract. There is marked fall in urethral flow pressure, followed by a rise in pressure in the bladder and urine flow. Once emptying is complete, impulses initiated by tension in the bladder wall are no longer produced, and the whole sequence begins again. Normal urinary functioning is characterized by factors such as absence of infection, appropriate diet and good fluid intake, normal bladder size and capacity, Pinchcock effect, etc. The following are signs and symptoms of urinary incontinence: leaking urine during normal activities like lifting, coughing, or without any warning sign or urge, sudden strong urges to urinate, bedwetting, a feeling of incomplete emptying, post-micturition dribble, or pain on passing urine. The most common causes of incontinence include prostate surgery, damage to pelvic support structures because of pregnancy, childbirth, obesity, frequent high-impact activities, etc., uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, infection, neurogenic disorders, and nerve injury. The risk factors of urinary incontinence includes aging, increasing parity, family history, obesity, mode of delivery, and other conditions like diabetes and stroke. While there are many different types of urinary incontinence, the most common include stress incontinence and urge incontinence. The patient with detrusor overactivity complains of urge incontinence, which is involuntary leakage of urine accompanied by or immediately preceded by urgency, that is, a strong desire to void. The amount lost is related to the intensity of urgency and the amount of urine in the bladder. Detrusor overactivity may be further qualified as neurogenic where there is a relevant neurological condition, or as idiopathic when there is no known cause. Management of urge incontinence consists of removing the cause, pharmacotherapy to reduce detrusor activity, and exercises to strengthen the pelvic floor musculature if necessary. Stress incontinence occurs when there is unexpected leakage of urine caused by pressure or sudden muscle contractions on the bladder. This often occurs during exercise, heavy lifting, coughing, sneezing, or laughing. Stress incontinence is the most common bladder control problem in young and middle-aged women. In younger women, the condition may be due to an inherent weakness of the pelvic floor muscles or an effect from the stress of childbirth. When there is complaint of involuntary leakage associated with urgency and with exertion efforts such as sneezing or coughing, it is called mixed incontinence. Management of stress incontinence is by conservative treatment or surgery according to the nature and severity of the condition. Overflow incontinence is the incontinence that happens suddenly without an urge to urinate and without necessarily doing any physical activity. It is also known as underactive bladder syndrome. It is often found in people with diabetes or spinal cord injuries. Management is mainly pharmacological, surgical, and by supportive treatment. Nocturnal enuresis is urinary incontinence during sleep or bedwetting at an age when a person could be expected to be dry. The condition causes great psychological suffering and social deprivation. Antidiuretic drugs, specialized bedding products, and teaching pelvic floor muscle contractions are some of the many treatment options available. Giggle incontinence refers to an embarrassing leakage of urine on laughing. Girls in particular go through this around puberty, if not before. There is often a positive family history of this problem. Management is through pelvic floor muscle exercise and bladder training. Sexual activity can cause urinary symptoms and lower urinary tract dysfunction, and this in turn may give rise to sexual problems. Simple advice to empty the bladder prior to intercourse, drug therapy for reducing detrusor overactivity, and voluntary pelvic floor muscle contraction to control leakage and inhibit the detrusor muscle are helpful to control urgency. Functional incontinence has less to do with bladder disorder and more to do with the logistics of getting to a bathroom in time. It's usually found in elderly or disabled people who have normal or near normal bladder control but cannot get to the toilet in time because of mobility limitations or confusion. Each of these requires an individualized solution. Loss of urine through channels other than the urethra is called extraurethral incontinence. This may be due to congenital abnormality such as an aberrant ureter draining into the vault of the vagina. Management usually requires reconstructive surgery. Now that we have understood the causes and types of urinary incontinence, we will learn about the methods of physiotherapy assessment. The patient with urinary problems should be interviewed and examined in a quiet, private room in an unhurried manner and without interruption. The initial priority is to gain insight into the problem as the patient perceives and experiences it, and the specific ways in which the condition is affecting the patient's life, past and present, which may have a bearing on the current situation such as occupation, childbearing, or back problems. Urinalysis uses region strips and is a simple, cost-effective way of detecting several substances in urine such as sugar, blood, leukocytes, nitrites, and ketones. The strip changes color according to abnormal content of the urine. It is read against the normal coding key on the strip container. If result is positive, midstream urine sample should be sent for full laboratory testing. Paper towel test involves the patient to hold a colored paper towel against the perineum in standing position and cuff strongly 3 times. Any leakage is absorbed by the paper towel, which where damp changes color. Assessment of the amount of leakage is by weighing or measuring the area of dampness. Bladder diary is an invaluable tool in assessment. The patient is asked to note the time of day and to measure the volume of urine voided each time he or she goes to the toilet. This is recorded on a special chart over a period of days decided with the patient or caretaker or both jointly. PAD test is approved by the International Continence Society. It comprises of a pre-weighed absorbent perineal pad put on by the patient and the timing noted. The patient is asked not to void until the end of the test. The patient drinks 500 ml of distilled water within 15 minutes, then sits or rests to the end of the first half hour. In the following half hour, the patient is asked to perform a variety of physical activity. At the end of the hour, the pad is removed and weighed. Any difference from the starting pad weight constitutes fluid loss and this is recorded. In perineal and vaginal assessment, the perineum is observed first for skin condition, signs of infection, vaginal discharge, hemorrhoids, prolapse, and evidence of episiotomy or previous surgery. The patient is asked to cough and strain. Evidence of any leakage of urine is noted. However, it requires proper training and experience to perform. Pelvic floor muscle is graded on a 6-point scale modeled on the Oxford scale by Laycock. 0 denotes nil contraction, 1 flicker or minor contraction, 2 weak muscle activity, 3 moderate muscle contraction, 4 good muscle contraction, and 5 strong muscle contraction. Laycock further developed the perfect scheme, which uses factors power, endurance, repetition, and speed of contraction to grade pelvic floor muscle. There are 13 ways of confirming a contraction of pelvic floor muscle, ranging from self-examination by the patient, biofeedback, to transperineal or labial ultrasound. Biofeedback is a technique by which information about a normally unconscious physiological process is presented to the patient or therapist or both as a visual, auditory or tactile signal. This can be achieved through a periometer which records changes in activity in the region of the vagina or through complex clinic-based computerized manometric and electromyographic equipment using a vaginal pressure probe. The educator is inserted into the vagina with patient in crook line. On a voluntary contraction of pelvic floor muscle, its indicator moves downward and is one way of confirming a contraction. The King's Health Questionnaire is commonly used. It is specific for urinary incontinence and can be scored. A helpful measure of the severity of symptoms of incontinence as they affect the patient is the visual analog scale. Urodynamic radiological and electromyographical assessment is done by the means of cystometry to determine the relationship between the volume of fluid and the pressure in the bladder during both filling and voiding. Urethral pressure profilometry, in which a microtransducer is used to get an accurate urethral pressure profile. Uroflowmetry is a reliable indicator of normal detrusor contraction and urethral relaxation. It measures the quantity of fluid passed per unit of time. Distal urethral electric conductance for the accurate detection of leakage of urine. Electrophysiological test can be used to record the electrical activity associated with resting and contracting muscles, particularly the puborectalis and the external anal sphincter through electromyography and motor conduction tests. Ultrasound imaging and magnetic resonance imaging are helpful in patients who report a feeling of incomplete emptying post-micturition or signs of overflow incontinence. Other tests such as perineal descent measurement and cystourethroskopy or cystoscopy may be of help. The first step towards treatment is recognition of the problem and to realize that incontinence is a burden that can be lifted. Pharmacological treatment includes drugs such as anticholinergics to calm an overactive bladder, alpha blockers in men with urge or overflow incontinence to help relax bladder neck muscles and muscle fibers in prostate gland, and antidiuretics for nocturnal enuresis. Surgical treatment mainly includes reconstruction or replacement surgery to support the urethra to prevent leakage and to treat stress urinary incontinence by means of vaginal tape, Colpo's suspension and urethral slings. Now that we have covered major methods of assessment, let's move on to physiotherapy treatment. The general principle of physiotherapy treatment are: patient education regarding self-help should include individualized continence promoting advice. Any other health problem which might be contributing to continence dysfunction such as back pain or medications for other conditions such as high blood pressure should be considered and the patient is referred where appropriate. If no voluntary pelvic floor muscle contraction is possible, every effort should be directed to facilitate that ability, including electrical stimulation. Some of the methods to promote continence are: an adult should drink at least 1000 to 1500 ml of fluid per day. Women should sit, not crouch, to void and defecate. Every effort should be made to avoid regular straining at stool and to use an optimal sitting position. Restrict caffeine and alcohol intake as both are diuretics and tend to heighten the activity of detrusor muscle and reduce tension in the external urethral sphincter. If an activity causes leakage, the patient should discontinue it. Teaching patients pelvic floor muscle contraction is of utmost importance in the treatment. Pelvic floor muscle voluntary contraction can be performed in any position, but a useful initial position is sitting on a hard chair, leaning forward with support from the forearm, on thighs, with knees and feet apart. A large simple diagram or a model of the pelvis, pelvic organs, and the levator ani muscle is helpful to show the openings and the lifting and gripping effect of the muscle action. The language must be chosen specifically for each individual patient, employing words and images that are likely to be familiar and easily understood. For example, asking the patient to stimulate, stopping, passing urine or gas. The patient is asked to perform long, strong contractions, one after the other, with a rest of about 4 seconds in between, each held for as long as possible to see how many contractions can be performed before serious fatigue sets in. The length of the hold and the number of repetitions are recorded. The patient is also asked to try repeating short, sharp, quick contractions until fatigued and the perceived number is recorded. The patient will probably find that voluntary pelvic floor muscle contraction performed in other positions such as supine lying, procline, and standing will each feel different. It is useful exercise having started in sitting to experiment in the initial teaching sessions by going on to try contracting in other positions. Sometimes the patient reports more sensation or better quality contraction or both. The patient should also understand that it is possible to exercise the pelvic floor muscle in a variety of situations while telephoning, on the bus or train, watching television, etc. Some of the positions where the patient can perform pelvic floor contractions are shown here in small video snippets. Biofeedback may be used in treatment as a challenge and motivator, and with great care as an audit tool. Manometric devices are used with the vaginal pressure probe and give biofeedback by means of manometer or a visual display. The display from such equipment is shown on a visual display unit screen, and the patient is then asked to perform a suitable series of slow contractions and a series of fast, short contractions appropriate to her ability. Pneumatic devices such as the perinometer can be used to measure pressure within the vagina, and the educator can be used to motivate women to practice pelvic floor muscle exercises. Other interventions such as the Neurisis alarm to teach bed better, to wake to the sensation of full bladder and void, ring pessary as support to pelvic organs, and absorbent pads and catheters in those where loss cannot be controlled can be utilized. These allow the sufferer to socialize without embarrassment. Attempts to find a means of applying graded resistance to the pelvic floor muscle led to the development and marketing of vaginal cones in 1988. Each cone is about the size and shape of a tampon and has a nylon string attached to it. The cone is inserted into the vagina and the patient stands and walks around. If the cone can be retained for 1 minute, the patient progresses on to the next cone, which is slightly heavier, and so on until a cone slips out in under 1 minute. The heaviest cone that can be retained for 1 minute is used for exercise. The purpose of electrical stimulation is to produce muscle contraction, and this can be used to attempt to assess patients who are unable to produce a voluntary pelvic floor muscle contraction or have a very weak pelvic floor muscle, particularly if they have urodynamic stress incontinence. Electrotherapeutic currents, including Faraday, galvanic, IFT, have proved to be effective in treatment of incontinence. Once a patient is able voluntarily to contract the pelvic floor muscle reliably, then intensive active exercise is probably the best treatment. The other use of electrical stimulation is to utilize the sensory stimulation it causes to inhibit detrusor overactivity and normalize reflex activity. So this is useful for some patients who experience urgency and urge incontinence. Methods of electrical stimulation include interferential therapy for re-education of pelvic floor muscles, low frequency muscle stimulation. It is usual to use a vaginal electrode. It is supplied with an indicator which, if attached, can be used to confirm whether a pelvic floor muscle contraction is being obtained by the electrical stimulation. Electrical nerve stimulation of bladder can also be done by placing electrodes under the skin or over it, either through leg or lower back. This is usually done for severe urge incontinence or overactive bladder that hasn't been helped by other treatment. For patients with stress urinary incontinence, if no voluntary pelvic floor muscle contraction is possible, then biofeedback and electrical stimulation should be considered. If voluntary pelvic floor muscle contraction is possible, then patients should be taught the NAC or counter bracing technique, that is to contract pelvic floor muscle before or during events that trigger leakage such as coughing or sneezing, and the patients are encouraged to follow an intensive program of daily exercise individually designed to increase the strength and endurance of the pelvic floor muscle. It may be augmented with biofeedback, homoclinic based electrical stimulation or cones. The objective of electrical stimulation is to produce pelvic floor muscle contractions. Commonly, a pulse duration of 250 seconds with a frequency of 30 to 40 Hz and an individualized duty cycle to match the patient's ability to contract the pelvic floor muscle is recommended once or twice a day for 10 to 20 minutes. A vaginal electrode is used and the patient is encouraged to join in with the stimulator. For patients with urgency or urge incontinence or both, if voluntary pelvic floor muscle contraction is possible, patients should be taught deferment techniques such as the NAC series of repeated strong pelvic floor muscle contractions, distraction or perineal pressure, etc. For patients receiving pharmacotherapy, some may find the side effects of medication too unpleasant to continue. Others seem not to benefit at all. For these patients, it may be appropriate to offer a trial of electrical stimulation from a home stimulator. This should be set to deliver a current of 5 to 10 Hz in continuous mode with a 500-second pulse duration. The objective of this is to try to inhibit the detrusor muscle and normalize reflex activity. The suggested treatment regime would be once or twice a day for 20 to 30 minutes. For patients with mixed incontinence, a combination of the above would be considered. Bladder retraining or drill was first described by Jeffcoat and Francis in 1966 and was called the bladder discipline. It aims to restore bladder capacity to near normal levels. Bladder retraining includes deferment techniques such as repeated maximal pelvic floor contractions at times when urgency is felt, perineal pressure such as sitting on a rolled towel or arm of a chair, standing on tiptoes, toe curling, calf stretching, and distractions such as companionship, games, television, or music. Where patients are unable to toilet independently or are confused or both, timed voiding may be helpful to avoid accidents. The patient's need for the toilet is observed and charted over several days. A routine of toileting times is then set. Ideally, this is individualized. The concept of timed voiding is also helpful for patients who have lost sensation of bladder fullness and for those women whose life is so pressured and intense that they forget or fail to take the opportunity to void until it's too late. In assessing the patient referred with incontinence, it is important for the physiotherapist to determine to what extent poor balance, joint stiffness, or lack of strength and endurance in muscles other than the pelvic floor may be contributing to the incontinence or aggravating it, and implement the right treatment plan. A few ways to prevent urinary incontinence is as follows. A regular fitness program, adequate fiber and fluid in diet, abdominal and pelvic floor pattern during effort activities, avoidance of straining at defecation and urination, voiding only when necessary and not just in case, a few pelvic floor exercises on a regular basis. In conclusion, I would like to say management of urinary incontinence is possible with accurate diagnosis and individualized holistic treatment plan, including different physiotherapy interventions and patients' consistent effort. Thank you everyone for your patience in listening and understanding this topic. I hope you have some learning and insights from this webinar. I would like to thank Rajni ma'am and Sheelu ma'am for their guidance and the PT department of PDU and IPPD for giving me an opportunity to present this webinar. I would like to extend my thanks to Samriddhi Sarkar who volunteered as a subject of this webinar, and once again a very big thank you to everyone who attended this webinar.